I'm Beck and welcome to a spoiler-free review for The Malevolent Seven, which is the first book in a new fantasy series by Sebastian de Castell. Sebastian de Castell is one of my favourite authors, and so I naturally gravitated straight to this as soon as it released. However, it didn't hit the same mark for me as his Greatcoat series did, even though I did enjoy it, so I wanted to talk about it with you. This story follows Cade, and he is a mercenary wanderist, which essentially means he's a sellsword wizard. And at the start of the book, Cade is introduced with his wanderist mercenary ally, pal, Corrigan. They're in the midst of a battle, and then after the battle occurs, Cade is framed for a murder, and then Corrigan sets off his lightning magic and makes an escape for both of them. And then after they have escaped, Corrigan describes what is essentially a quest from his client, who is paying Cade and Corrigan to go on, and his quest means that they have to gather 5 other wanderists and then go to a castle and kill the guy who is living at this castle. So that is the foundation of the plot, and it's why these characters are going the way that they are going. It is also important to mention that the people who are pursuing Cade are called the Glorian Justiciars, and they are trying to persecute him for justice even though he didn't commit this murder. Now, the things that I did like about this were the characters. Even though sometimes they didn't quite hit the mark for me, I liked the tone and the style of Cade's voice. And I think because of his humor and because he didn't take everything too seriously, you got an understanding of not only his perspective, but the certain fallacies that come with having particular loyalties to the different factions that are laid out in this book. So the Glorian Justiciars obviously are one of them, the mercenaries are another. The Wanderists as well are the core magic system here. And while I mentioned that Corrigan has his lightning ability, that is ingrained in him. It's just an ability that he has. However, Cade has to do deals with demons in order to get his abilities. So obviously not all Wanderists are born, some are made in Cade's case, and each time Cade does a deal he has to give over part of his soul to get this magic. So that's also an interesting part of his character because he's obviously wanting power and willing to cut pieces of him away to do that. And I like how the book analysed, or not analysed necessarily, but laid out his self-worth in these interactions and his interactions with his old mentor and a bunch of different characters throughout the story, even with his own internal narration, which sometimes was on the mark and other times frustrated me because it feels like with Sebastian de Castell's writing, he brings you to an edge, and if he walks along that edge, it's really spectacular. And sometimes in this book, he stepped over this edge, and that made me want to put the book down sometimes and just have a bit of a break, or it made me roll my eyes sometimes just with the interactions the characters were having internally and with each other. So sometimes it really hit that balance, other times it didn't. And I noticed this about the Greatcoat series, which he also wrote as well. However, a lot of the moments in that series that were the key emotional moments between characters, while they walked that line, sometimes they might have gone over that edge as well, but I didn't care as much because I loved the journey and the characters. Whereas in this story, when he went over the edge a little bit, it brought me out of the book. And I think that's because with the characters here, they didn't seem as closely knitted together as the foundation of the Greatcoats series. And I thought, well, if I hadn't read the Greatcoats, would I feel the same way? And I actually think I would. There is something in here that is noticeable. It's like a feeling that doesn't quite sit right. And it's almost like they weren't developed enough, or the reason tying them together, this plot to go and kill this guy, it wasn't as deep as it needed to be to form the bonds with these characters that I was hoping they would form. So it felt very much surface, but also this is a start of a new series. So if you're going to build that foundation, maybe it's going to happen across the rest of the books, because there are a cast of characters here and I only really got the connection between Cade and Corrigan. The others were kind of starting to be built up, but I didn't really care for them. Like, you could sub them out with someone else and I wouldn't care. But with Cade and Corrigan, you could see that dynamic, but there are still a lot of things about both characters that neither of them know about each other. And so when you're forming characters that are supposed to rely on each other when the situation is life and death, I thought they'd know each other and trust each other a little bit more. But again, that can also be clever in a way, because if a character like Cade, he's supposed to hate himself because he's a morally great character, he's done bad things in the past and he's not forgiven himself for them, which is a very similar format to Falkio, but Falkio was heroic and idealistic and Cade is willing to kill people for his own gain. So I can see the differences between both characters, but it feels like Sebastian de Castell just brought up the dynamics or the description of Falkio, plopped it into this book, and then kind of tweaked certain aspect of it. It didn't feel like it was authentically Cade. And I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else. I could just see certain parts of even the dialogue were incongruous with what Cade was actually thinking, and his actions didn't always match what he believed about himself. So I think it just needed a little bit more tightening, and it would have been fantastic. Some of the jokes as well, there was one at the beginning and then one near the end, they just did not get the tone right at all. They soured the story for me, and I was like, why would you do that? I get that they're supposed to be crass characters because they're mercenaries, but it just felt so jarring. The rest of the tone of voice of Cade was actually quite jovial and sardonic, and I really enjoyed it, but those two particular jokes just completely removed me from the story, and I was like, why? That was so unnecessary. It's meant to build up this kind of rapport between Corrigan and Cade. I just honestly thought that Cade and the demon had more of a relationship than Corrigan and Cade did at certain points in the story. And so I was like, why would you do this right near the end when it completely takes me out of the emotional punch you're going for? So again, that's another part of the reason it didn't quite hit that mark for me. I did enjoy it. Like I said, I wouldn't have finished it if I didn't enjoy it. And I think the delivery of the audiobook was spectacular as well. That might have also colored my opinion in terms of it being kind of like Falkio, but I feel like they are really cut from the same cloth, these characters. It's just Falkio became a hero and Cade became a mercenary. That's really the only difference between their characters, to me at least. And like I said, I did enjoy the plot of this, but sometimes I feel like the purpose got a bit lost just because they go on different almost side quests before they got to this main point where they were all gunning for. Like sometimes there were interactions and they were in places and I was like, I'm enjoying this story, but like, why are they here? Where are they going again? So I'd forget what was actually the purpose of the plot. And I don't know if that was intentional or not. Like I was just enjoying the story as it was taking me along, but sometimes I needed a little bit more push. It could have been so much stronger, and I went into this expecting Sebastian de Castell to kind of blow me out of the water, and I loved his other books and I wanted to give this 5 stars. As it stands though, I'm probably going to settle on a 4 because while I did like a lot about this story, there are some parts of this story that felt quite diluted and like they just needed a bit more focus in order for me to get to that strengthened 5 stars. So I'm going to continue the series eventually, but I just wish that this did a little bit more. Like it felt like it wasn't quite defined yet, and we haven't had a Sebastian de Castell release in a while, so I'm thinking he probably took a while to write this, or he had other projects that he was working on and then ended up bringing this out instead. It just felt like wasn't quite there yet, but maybe my expectations ruined it for me. I was expecting it to be a 5 and it wasn't. So I'm thinking I should lower it to a 3.5. Maybe I will, because I really wanted to give it 4 stars. But after talking in this review, I'm realizing that there is more that I disliked about this book than I necessarily loved. So I think I'm going to end up going for a 3.5 stars because I'm clearly frustrated about it. So why should I ignore that in my rating and just pretend everything is fine when I actually had problems that I could mostly identify about it? So unfortunately this is a 3.5, which is still an enjoyable rating, but it's not a rating I thought I'd even approach given that this is a 5-star author for me. So a little bit disappointing, but we'll see how this series eventuates. I guess that is my rambly thoughts about the Malevolent Seven without spoilers. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments and I'll see you on my next one. Bye.